The hallway light outside apartment 3B had been flickering for 3 days, and by Thursday night, it had developed the kind of attitude that made tenants stop me, like I personally owed them daylight. I was standing on the second step of a metal ladder with a screwdriver in my teeth, rain ticking against the old windows, when the front door of the building opened and brought in a hard gust of wet air. That was normal for Portland in March. What was not normal was Lila Hart standing in the entryway with both arms wrapped around a white garment bag, nearly as tall as she was, her hair damp at the edges, her cheeks flushed from the cold, and the expression of a woman trying very hard not to look like she had been abandoned by someone who should have been there. I knew the bag was a wedding dress before I saw the little gold letters from the bridal shop printed near the zipper. Everybody in the building knew Lila was getting married that Saturday, because Lila was the kind of person who apologized for taking up space, even when the whole world had already built an aisle for her to walk down. I climbed off the ladder and asked if she needed a hand, even though the answer was sitting right there between us, huge and white and ridiculous in the narrow lobby. Lila gave me the kind of smile people use when they are trying to keep a bad night from becoming visible. She said she had it, which was obviously untrue, because the dress bag immediately slid sideways and nearly knocked over Mrs. Bellamy's umbrella stand. I caught the hanger at the top before it hit the floor, and for 1 second our hands landed in the same place, hers cold from the rain, mine dusty from the old fixture. She looked at our hands, then up at me, and said Graham was supposed to meet her at the bridal shop, but something had come up. She said it lightly, like a joke, but I had lived in that building long enough to know the difference between a joke and a bruise with manners. I told her the stairs were narrow, and the elevator was still pretending to be a piece of furniture, so unless she wanted the dress to spend the night wedged between the second and third floor, I was carrying the back end. She sighed like she was about to argue, then gave up with the smallest nod. That was Lila's problem, or one of them. She treated accepting help like it was a debt she would have to repay with interest. We started up the stairs slowly, me behind her with the bottom of the garment bag lifted high, her in front trying not to trip over the hem of her own life. The dress kept brushing the wall, then my shoulder, then the rail, too big for the staircase and too delicate for the building. At the second floor landing, she laughed under her breath and said this was probably a bad sign. I told her old buildings hated weddings on principle. They had seen too many people promise forever and then fight over who got the good dishes. That earned me a real laugh, but it disappeared quickly. By the time we reached her apartment, the hallway smelled like rain, old wood, and the lavender soap she always used. She unlocked the door with one hand while trying to keep the dress from sliding, and I stepped inside only far enough to help hang it from the top of her closet door. Her apartment looked the way it always did when I came to fix something. Stacks of children's art projects on the table, half-finished lesson plans, one mug in the sink, and too many wedding things trying to invade a home that had once felt soft and lived in. There were place cards on the counter, pale ribbon on a chair, a little framed photo of her and Graham near the lamp. He had the kind of smile men used when they knew the camera liked them. In the photo, Lila looked beautiful, but not relaxed. I noticed that, and then I hated myself a little for noticing. She stood in front of the dress without touching it. The garment bag swayed slightly from the closet door, white fabric hidden behind plastic, waiting for her like an answer she had already agreed to give. I cleared my throat and said she should probably get out of the wet coat before she froze. She nodded but did not move. Then she asked me if I wanted coffee, which made no sense at 9 at night, and I said no because I knew an escape route when I heard one. I reached for the door and told her I should finish the hallway light before the whole building accused me of creating atmosphere. That was when she said my name. Not Mr. Mercer, not Owen in the casual neighbor way she usually said it, but softly, like she had set the word down before it broke. I turned back. Lila was still looking at the dress, but her voice had changed. She asked if I ever thought people could walk too far into a life just because everyone was watching. I should have said something practical. I was good at practical. Practical had kept me out of trouble for 34 years. Instead, I asked her if she was okay. She smiled at that, but her eyes went bright, and that was worse than crying. Then she looked at me like she had been holding one question behind her teeth all night, maybe longer, and finally let it out. Would you have married me? For a moment, the rain was louder than both of us. I looked at the dress, then at her, then at the door, I should have walked through 30 seconds earlier. I knew there were safe answers. I knew there were decent answers. I knew she was engaged to another man, and I was the neighbor who fixed radiators, changed bulbs, carried boxes, and kept his feelings locked behind useful hands. So I told her carefully that a question like that was not something she should ask a man unless she wanted the truth. Lila wiped at one eye like she was annoyed it had betrayed her, then looked straight at me and said that was exactly why she had asked me. The truth was, Lila Hart had been making it difficult for me to be a decent man for almost a year. I first met her the week she moved into 3B, when her radiator screamed like a dying tea kettle at 2 in the morning, and she opened the door wearing paint-splattered sweatpants, one sock, and the embarrassed smile of someone who hated being a problem. She kept apologizing while I bled the radiator valve, and I told her old buildings were like old men, noisy, stubborn, and mostly harmless if you knew where to tap them. She laughed at that, and I remembered the sound longer than I should have. After that, there was always something small, a mailbox key that stuck, a smoke detector that chirped only when she was trying to grade art projects, a grocery bag that split open in the lobby and sent oranges rolling everywhere like the building itself had decided to flirt on my behalf. Through all of it, she was engaged, and that one fact sat between us like a locked door I had no business testing. So I became useful. That was the safest version of me. I fixed what broke, carried what was heavy, made jokes when her eyes looked tired, and disappeared before kindness could start sounding like want. Graham showed up sometimes in clean coats and expensive shoes, usually double-parked, usually looking at his phone, always calling her babe in a way that sounded more like punctuation than affection. I did not like him, but not liking another woman's fiancé was easy. Admitting why was the dangerous part. Men like me learn early that being reliable can trick you into feeling close to people who never meant to choose you. I had been the emergency contact, the ride home, the guy who stayed late, the one women thanked with soft eyes before going back to men who made them nervous in more exciting ways. I was not angry about it anymore. At least, I told myself I was not. Lila seemed to know all of that without me saying it. After she asked whether I would have married her, she did not take it back, which somehow made the room feel smaller. I told her she was tired, cold, and 3 days from a wedding, and that maybe this was the kind of question that showed up when a person had carried too much dress up too many stairs. She folded her arms around herself and said I did that when I was scared. When I asked what she meant, she said I turned everything into a practical problem, because practical problems could be solved without anyone getting hurt. I wanted to deny it, but she was standing there with wet hair and bright eyes, next to a wedding dress she looked afraid to touch, reading me more clearly than most people who had known me for years. I said Graham was the man she should be having this conversation with. Lila looked toward the framed photo on the lamp table and said Graham loved conversations that came with good lighting, witnesses, and a clear ending. Before I could answer, her phone rang on the counter. She looked at the screen, and her face changed so quickly it made my chest tighten. She wiped under both eyes, cleared her throat, and became cheerful on command. I heard enough to know it was her mother, because Lila kept saying yes, the dress was safe, yes, the rehearsal schedule was fine, yes, Graham was just busy, yes, she was happy. The word happy came out bright and empty. While she talked, she stared at the garment bag on the closet door like it was listening and judging her performance. I stood near the door with one hand on the knob, knowing I should leave, and knowing I would not, because there are moments when walking away is technically correct and still feels like cowardice. When the call ended, Lila set the phone down carefully, as if one rough movement might break the version of herself everyone kept congratulating. She did not cry. Somehow that made it worse. She just looked at me and said her mother had already confirmed the florist, the photographer, the makeup artist, the brunch reservation, and 3 relatives Lila barely knew who were apparently very excited to watch her make the best decision of her life. I tried to say her name in a warning voice, the one men use when they are trying to keep a room from catching fire. She smiled without humor and said everyone kept telling her how lucky she was. Then she stepped closer, not enough to touch me, but enough that I could smell rain in her hair and coffee on her breath, and asked the one question I had spent months burying under work orders, spare keys, and late-night repairs. She asked if I had ever wanted to tell her not to marry Graham. I did not answer her that night. Not in the way she deserved, because some truths are not brave just because they are honest. I told her I was the wrong man to ask, while her wedding dress was hanging 6 feet away and her fiancé's photo was sitting on the table like a witness. Lila looked at me for a long second, then nodded like she had expected me to choose the honorable answer, even if part of her hated me for it. I went back into the hallway, finished replacing the light, and stood under it afterward with my screwdriver in my hand, listening to the rain and feeling like I had fixed the smallest thing in the building while the rest of it was coming apart. The next day, I kept busy in the basement workshop, sanding down an old maple chair for Mrs. Bellamy, because work had always been my favorite way to avoid feeling too much. Around 8 that evening, I heard the soft knock on the doorframe before I saw her. Lila stood at the top of the basement steps with the garment bag draped over one arm, her face pale, her mouth set in that careful little line people use when they are about to ask for something they already know is unfair. She said the zipper was stuck. That was all at first. Just those 4 words, simple enough for a maintenance request, except she was holding a wedding dress and looking at me like the universe had a cruel sense of humor. I told her no before she finished explaining, and she actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because she knew exactly why I said it. She said her maid of honor was stuck at work, her mother would make it a crisis, and Graham had responded to her text with a thumbs-up emoji and a reminder that they needed a cute couple photo before the rehearsal dinner. I hated him for that more than I should have. Not loudly, not in some dramatic, heroic way, but in the quiet way you hate a man who has been handed a living, breathing woman and keeps treating her like part of the table setting. I told her again that this was a terrible idea. She looked down at the dress, then back at me, and said she knew, but she trusted me. There are sentences that do not touch you and still manage to put their hands on your chest. That one did. I turned away and wiped sawdust off the workbench, like that might make the room less intimate, then told her the door stayed open, and she stayed mostly covered, and if either of us felt weird, we stopped. Lila gave me a tiny smile and said I always built rules when I was scared. I told her rules had kept civilization alive and men like me out of trouble. She changed in the little storage alcove behind an old folding screen we used when tenants dropped off furniture, and I stared very hard at a crack in the concrete floor while she rustled inside all that fabric. When she stepped out, the dress was not fully on, not in any way that felt like a wedding photograph. It was half-fastened, slightly twisted, caught at the back, making her look less like a bride and more like a woman trapped halfway inside someone else's expectation. I kept my eyes where they belonged. I want credit for that, though I probably do not deserve it, because every careful movement felt louder than it should have. She turned her back to me, gathered her hair over one shoulder, and said the zipper had snagged near the seam. My fingers found the little metal tab, and I worked slowly, keeping as much distance as possible while still doing the job. The fabric was expensive, the kind of delicate thing my hands were not built for, and Lila must have felt me hesitate because she said softly that I fixed things more fragile than this all the time. I told her old chairs did not ask me complicated questions in wet hallways. She let out a breath that almost became a laugh, and for a few seconds the room eased. Then her phone buzzed on the workbench, lighting up with Graham's name and a message preview asking if she could send a smiling picture because his mother wanted to post something sweet before the big weekend. Lila saw it at the same time I did. Her shoulders dropped, just a little, but enough for me to feel the dress shift under my hands. She said Graham never noticed when something was wrong, unless it affected how things looked. Then, after a silence, she admitted he had not asked once whether she was nervous. He had asked about the playlist, the guest count, the weather, the photos, his tie, the hotel block, but not her. I got the zipper free then, almost too suddenly, and the dress settled properly around her like the room had made a decision neither of us agreed with. I stepped back at once, but Lila did not move. She looked at herself in the dusty mirror, leaning against my workshop wall, surrounded by paint cans, clamps, and unfinished furniture, and said she looked like somebody a man could marry if he did not ask too many questions. That was the moment I knew I could not keep being the comfortable place she came to bleed. I told her, quietly, that if she wanted me to be a good man, she could not keep coming to me like this. Lila turned from the mirror, eyes bright but steady, and said maybe she was tired of everyone needing me to be good except her. The next afternoon, the building decided to involve itself, because old buildings have a talent for choosing the worst possible moment to become dramatic. The elevator jammed between the first and second floors, with nobody inside it, thank God, but with enough timing to make Lila's apartment the temporary storage room for half the rehearsal dinner decorations. By 4 o'clock, her front door was open, the hallway was full of white boxes, and I was carrying wooden signs, framed seating charts, and 2 crates of candles past people who kept saying thank you without looking at my face. Lila tried to apologize every time I passed her, but she was being pulled in 3 directions by her mother, a bridesmaid with a clipboard, and a florist on speakerphone who apparently believed roses could sense emotional weakness. She looked polished now, hair pinned back, sweater tucked neatly into a skirt, lipstick on, smile ready. If I had not seen her in my workshop the night before, standing in a half-zipped wedding dress like she was trapped inside a beautiful mistake, I might have believed the performance. Graham arrived while I was tightening a loose screw on the hallway table they wanted to use for welcome cards. I knew it was him before Lila said his name because the air around her changed. Not warmer, not happier, just prepared. He came in wearing a camel coat and the kind of confidence that made small rooms feel like rented space. He kissed Lila on the cheek without really stopping and said the place looked chaotic in a charming way, which was a sentence only a man who had never carried anything heavy would think counted as helpful. Then he glanced at me, at the screwdriver in my hand, and asked if the super could take the heavier boxes down to the van before traffic got bad. He said it politely. That almost made it worse. Some men do not insult you because they are angry. They insult you because they have never imagined you matter enough to insult properly. Before I could answer, Lila did. She said, "His name is Owen," in a calm voice that cut cleaner than anger would have. The hallway went quiet for half a breath. Graham blinked, then smiled like she had corrected the pronunciation of a wine label. He said, of course, "Owen, thanks for all the help," and reached past me to pick up one small envelope box as if we were now men together in the trenches. I should have let it go. I usually did. But Lila looked at me, and there was something in her face that made me realize she was not just defending my name. She was defending the part of herself that knew the difference between someone who showed up and someone who arrived when the work was nearly done. Her mother swept in right after that, smelling like perfume and panic, praising Graham for looking handsome and telling Lila she needed to stop making that worried face because brides photographed better when they trusted the process. Lila nodded, smiled, adjusted a ribbon, answered 3 questions, and disappeared a little more with each one. I saw it happen in pieces. Her shoulders lowered. Her laugh got brighter and less real. Her hands kept touching the edge of the garment bag when the dress was carried out for final steaming, almost like she wanted to apologize to it. Graham stood beside her for a photo his mother wanted, one arm around her waist, phone angled high, smile perfect. Lila smiled too, but her eyes found mine over his shoulder for 1 second, and in that second I felt more like a thief than a witness. By the time the boxes were loaded and the family storm moved downstairs, I was left in the hall with a stack of flattened cardboard and the strange exhaustion that comes from watching someone drown politely. Lila stepped out of her apartment last, carrying a small bag of place cards. Graham waited near the stairwell, scrolling through his phone. He did not see me near the service alcove, or maybe he saw me and decided I belonged to the walls. Lila said something too soft for me to catch. Graham sighed and told her she needed to stop being dramatic, that cold feet were embarrassing this close to the wedding, and that everyone was stressed, but not everyone made it the center of the room. Lila went still, and I stood there with cardboard in my hands, realizing the hallway light was finally fixed, but nobody had taught this man how to see what was breaking right in front of him. I wanted to step out of that alcove and say something. I wanted to ask Graham if he knew how lucky a man had to be to have Lila Hart standing beside him 3 days before a wedding, still trying to explain her fear in a voice gentle enough not to inconvenience him. But wanting to do the right thing and having the right to do it are not the same, and that was the line I kept finding with her. So I stayed where I was, holding flattened cardboard like an idiot, while Lila said nothing and Graham went downstairs to be admired by people who thought charm was the same thing as care. She did not look at me when she passed the alcove. I think she knew I was there. I think that made it worse. There are humiliations you can survive in public until one person who really sees you is close enough to witness them. I found her later on the back steps behind the building, sitting in her coat with her knees pulled close, the harbor fog moving low between the brick walls like the city was trying to keep a secret. She had not gone to the rehearsal dinner venue with everyone else. The place cards were beside her in a neat little stack, because even falling apart, Lila was the kind of woman who organized the wreckage. I sat 2 steps below her, leaving enough space to be honorable and close enough that she would not feel alone. For a while, neither of us said anything. I could hear traffic on the wet street, a gull somewhere near the docks, and the faint thump of someone upstairs dragging a chair across old floorboards. Finally, she said Graham had proposed 6 months ago at a rooftop restaurant, with both families hiding nearby, a photographer behind a plant, and a ring already approved by his mother. She told me she had gone to that dinner planning to end things. Not dramatically, not because she hated him, but because she had started to feel like a decorative version of herself around him. She said she had practiced the words all afternoon, but before she could say them, Graham was on one knee, everyone was crying, her mother had both hands over her mouth, and the waiter was bringing champagne. Lila looked at the fog instead of me, and said that when she saw how relieved everyone was, she confused their relief with proof. She said yes because the room wanted her to, because Graham looked so confident, because her mother looked so happy, because saying no would have made her the villain in a story everybody else had already decided was beautiful. I sat there listening, feeling something in me break open with a quiet kind of anger. Not the kind that wants to punch someone. The kind that wants to go back in time and stand between a woman and the moment she abandoned herself. She said she knew how it sounded. She said people would call her spoiled or dramatic, because Graham was handsome, successful, faithful as far as she knew, and polite in all the ways that showed up well in photographs. I told her being lucky on paper did not mean she was loved in real life. That made her turn toward me slowly, like I had said something she had needed for months and hated needing. Then she whispered that the dress did not feel like hers. It felt like it belonged to the woman everyone clapped for when she stayed agreeable. She said she had tried it on in the bridal shop and everyone cried. So she cried too, because apparently that was what brides did when the mirror showed them a future they were not allowed to question. I wanted to take her hand. I did not. That restraint cost me more than I expected, because she was close enough that I could see the little tremble in her fingers against the paper place cards. But I knew if I became the man she ran into while panicking, I would spend the rest of my life wondering whether she had chosen me or just the nearest unlocked door. So I told her the truth I had been avoiding since she asked me whether I would have married her. I said I did not want to be the man she ran to because she was scared. I wanted to be the man she chose when she was finally honest. Lila closed her eyes, and for one terrible second I thought I had hurt her. Then she nodded, once, like the words had landed exactly where they needed to. She asked me what she was supposed to do if the honest answer ruined everything. I looked up at the back of the building, at the lit windows, at all those rooms full of people living lives no one else fully understood, and I thought about how many times I had called something fixed just because it stopped making noise. Then I told her maybe everything that could be ruined by honesty was already broken. Lila stared at me for a long moment, and the fog kept moving behind her, soft and cold and impossible to hold. When her phone buzzed again, she did not look at it. She only sat there beside me, breathing like someone standing at the edge of a life she had not yet decided to leave. The rehearsal dinner was held in a private room above a seafood restaurant near the harbor, the kind of place with exposed brick, soft lighting, and windows that made every ordinary glass of water look like part of a magazine spread. I was not supposed to be there as a guest. That mattered to me more than it probably should have. Lila had asked me to bring over a repaired wooden display stand for the seating chart because one of the legs had cracked during all the moving, and I told myself that was all I was doing. Deliver the stand. Make sure it held. Leave before anyone could decide I belonged in the background of another photograph. But when I walked in through the side entrance with the stand under one arm, I saw her across the room in a pale blue dress instead of white, and every sensible thought I had tried to carry in with me went quiet. She was smiling at someone's aunt, holding a glass she was not drinking from, and looking like a woman trying to stay inside her own skin by force. Graham was in the center of the room, of course. Men like Graham did not stand near the center because they needed attention. They stood there because life had trained them to assume the center moved with them. He was shaking hands, laughing at the right volume, touching Lila's back whenever someone looked their way. I set up the repaired stand near the entrance and adjusted the seating chart while trying not to watch her watching me. She saw me anyway. Lila always did. For 1 second, her eyes met mine over a cluster of champagne glasses, and there was no rescue request in them. That was what scared me. She did not look like she wanted me to save her. She looked like she wanted one person in the room to remember who she really was if she forgot. Dinner started with speeches before food, because apparently, suffering needed structure. Graham's father talked about legacy, partnership, families joining, all the shiny words people use when they want marriage to sound like a business merger with flowers. Lila's mother dabbed her eyes before anyone had said anything touching. Then Graham stood, glass in hand, and gave the kind of speech that would have sounded perfect to anyone who had not heard Lila crying without crying on the back steps the night before. He talked about how effortless she was, how she never made life harder than it needed to be, how she fit into his world from the beginning. People smiled. Someone sighed. I looked at Lila and saw the exact moment those words stopped being compliments and became a door locking from the outside. She stood before he finished. Not dramatically, not with a crash of silverware or some movie scene gasp. She just rose from her chair, set her untouched glass on the table, and said Graham's name. The room softened at first, expecting something sweet. Graham smiled like she was about to reward him for performing so well. Lila took one breath, then another, and said she could not marry him. Silence did not fall all at once. It moved across the room in sections. First the table nearest her, then the bridesmaids, then her mother, then Graham, whose smile stayed on his face a second too long because his pride had not caught up with reality. He asked if she was joking, and she shook her head. Her voice trembled once, but it did not break. She said he was not a monster, and that almost made the room more uncomfortable, because people prefer clean villains. She said he had loved the version of her that stayed pleasant, stayed grateful, stayed easy, and she had helped him do it by pretending that version was enough. Her mother whispered her name like a warning. Graham's face changed then, not into grief, but into embarrassment, which told me more than anger would have. He told her they could talk privately, that she was overwhelmed, that this was humiliating. Lila looked at him, and for the first time since I had known her, she did not make herself smaller to protect someone else from the truth. She said quietly that humiliating him was not her goal, but marrying him to avoid humiliating everyone else would be worse. I stayed near the wall with my hands empty, every part of me wanting to step forward, and every better part of me refusing. This had to be hers. If I walked in and became the reason, they would turn her courage into scandal. So I stayed where she could see me, and when her eyes found mine again, I gave her one small nod. Not permission. She did not need that. Just proof that the world had not ended because she had finally told the truth. People left badly. They always do when a beautiful lie collapses before dessert. Some hugged her too tightly. Some avoided her completely. Some looked at me like they were trying to figure out what role I had played in a story they could still reduce to gossip. I carried the wooden stand back downstairs because my hands needed something to do, and by the time I stepped outside, the harbor air was cold enough to sting. Lila was standing under the restaurant awning alone, her arms wrapped around herself. No coat, no glass, no performance left. When she saw me, she gave a small, stunned laugh and said she did it. Then her face crumpled just enough to show the cost, and she whispered that now she had no idea who she was without the wedding. The wedding was canceled by sunrise, though canceled is too clean a word for what happened. Weddings do not disappear. They leave behind deposits, phone calls, flowers with nowhere to go, relatives who think shock gives them permission to ask cruel questions, and a white dress hanging in a garment bag like a ghost of the woman Lila almost became. For 2 weeks, I gave her space on purpose. That might have been the hardest kindness I had ever offered anyone. I fixed the elevator, replaced a cracked pane in the laundry room, tightened the loose rail on the back stairs, and did not knock on her door unless she put in a maintenance request. I saw her sometimes in the lobby, quieter than before but not broken, carrying groceries, answering texts, moving through the building like every step belonged to her a little more than the last. The dress ended up in the storage room beside my workshop because she said she could not look at it yet, and I told her old buildings were good at holding things until people were ready. She smiled at that, small but real, and for once I did not try to turn the moment into a joke. A few weeks later, she knocked on my door just after 7 in the evening. No rain this time. No dress. No panic hiding under lipstick. She wore jeans, a dark green sweater, and a paint smudge on her wrist from school, and she looked more like herself than I had ever seen her. I asked if something was broken, because apparently I still needed help being brave. Lila looked past me into the workshop, then back at my face, and said nothing was broken tonight. That one sentence did more to me than any dramatic confession could have. She told me she had started seeing a counselor, that she had returned some gifts, ignored some relatives, cried in inconvenient places, and learned that disappointing people did not actually kill her. Then she took a breath and asked if I would take her to coffee. A real date, she said, not a rescue, not a rebound, not a hallway emergency with better lighting. I wanted to say yes so fast it would have embarrassed both of us. Instead, I made myself ask if she was sure she was not just running from the life that hurt her. Lila did not flinch. She said she had done enough running while standing still, and this was different. This was choosing. Then she reached for my hand, not desperately, not like she needed me to hold her up, but like she was allowed to want something now. I looked at our hands and thought about the night I helped carry that wedding dress upstairs, how heavy it had felt between us, how impossible and wrong and strangely intimate. I told her I would take her to coffee on one condition. She raised an eyebrow and asked if all building superintendents negotiated romance like lease agreements. I said only the emotionally damaged ones. Then I told her we were not going to pretend this started after the wedding ended. Lila smiled. And there was sunlight in it even though the windows behind her were dark. She said it started long before that. I just finally stopped lying about it. We went to a little place by the harbor that served coffee strong enough to repair bad decisions. We talked until the chairs were stacked around us. There was no kiss in the rain, no grand speech, no neat little promise that everything would be easy from there. But when I walked her home, she did not rush upstairs. She sat with me on the back steps, paper cup warming her hands, fog rolling low through the alley, and leaned her shoulder against mine like she had chosen the quiet on purpose. Later that week, I helped her carry boxes of art supplies up to 3B. Bright paper, clay, brushes, the messy pieces of the life she actually loved. They were lighter than the dress, but somehow they mattered more. The garment bag stayed in the storage room for a while, not as a tragedy, not as a warning, more like proof that sometimes the life you almost entered has to hang in the dark for a bit before you can thank yourself for leaving it there. And sometimes the right person is not the one standing in front of everyone making promises. Sometimes it is the one in the stairwell, carrying the heavy end, waiting until you are honest enough to choose him back. Have you ever realized too late that the person quietly showing up for you was the one who truly saw you? Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.